NBC's Sahil Kapoor reports from Capitol Hill. I also want to bring in Dr. Irwin Redlener, founding director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University's Earth Institute. Sahil, so if he gets the job, he is facing the potential for having an awful lot of money that would be needed for some of the upgrades he's talking about gone for next year's budget. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. And it's not just Neil Jacobs for NOAA-related opening. There's also Mr. Taylor Jordan, who's been nominated to be an Assistant Secretary for Commerce for Environmental Observation and Prediction. Now, one of the things they'll likely get asked about is roughly $200 million in cuts to NOAA under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Off that, as much as $150 million could have helped fund and implement the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act, which was a law passed in 2017, aimed at improving understanding and forecasting capabilities of atmospheric events and their impact, along with developing more accurate, timely, and effective warnings of dangerous and high-impact weather events. That's according to the congressional record at the time. That law sailed through Congress with the support of both parties then. Democrats additionally point to staffing cuts, including layoffs and buyouts at NOAA and the National Weather Service, which they say will harm preparedness in this category as well. Related to all of this, there's a new letter by Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, asking the Commerce Department Inspector General to immediately open an investigation into the scope, breadth, and the ramifications of weather staffing shortages at a key local NWS stations, whether or not they contributed to the catastrophic loss of life and property during the deadly flooding, unquote. And Republicans I've talked to, Chris, are downplaying the impact of these cuts. Senator Tommy Tuberville, who voted for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, said he doesn't exactly know the full details or how much was cut from where, but he did say the floods were hard to predict and that there will be events that the country will not be able to predict. Finally, the debate and the consensus that informs, Chris, is very important because there's a major government funding deadline coming up at the end of September 30th.
Yeah, we're watching for that. So in the meantime, Dr. Redlener, Neil Jacobs was also asked by Senator Markey whether he supports these cuts. Here's what he said.
Dr. Jacobs, the Trump administration wants to cut NOAA's budget by 27%. No climate, weather, Sea Grant, Ocean Labs, many other programs exempted. Dr. Jacobs, yes or no, do you support these cuts?
Yes, I support the president's budget.
I have a disagreement with you. A 27% cut is going to have an impact because there's a definite ripple effect that occurs when that kind of funding is slashed, because of weather readiness without funding is an hallucination.
So that's Senator Markey's position. You know very well what the Trump administration position is. They can cut something like 27% from waste, fraud, and abuse. Who's right here in your long expertise, Doctor?
So, Chris, this is another problem in an appointee of Donald Trump in a critical position, and that is the refusal to disagree with the president, even when he is dead, when the president is dead wrong. Look, this is like Senator Markey said, it's impossible not to see functional outcomes that are terrible in our ability to predict weather and disasters and the warnings that Neil Jacobs was talking about. It's impossible to deny the fact that a 27% cut is going to have dramatic effects. And by the way, if you couple that with the president's desire to eliminate FEMA at the same time as these Weather Service cuts, we're talking about an absolute crisis in America's ability to do what it needs to do to avert disasters. You know, the thing about Neil Jacobs, his curriculum vitae, his background is excellent. He's a smart scientist. What he's not, though, is somebody who could dependably refute what the President of the United States is saying. This is not a loyalty exam. This is a key position that is supposed to protect Americans from the tragedy like we saw in Texas in this last few days, which, by the way, is not over yet. So I'm worried about it. I'm worried about this appointee because we need people that will stand up to the nonsense that President Trump is talking about when he talks about cuts to vital agencies.
Doctor, you've been saying for years, if we talk about what happened in Texas specifically. You have been saying for years that digital messaging warnings are not enough. We were talking about this in the last hour with a climate scientist. If loss of life is not enough to motivate, is there an economic argument that it's less expensive to stop destruction of property, to stop people from dying, than dealing with that in the aftermath of it?
Well, the prediction of these events, Chris, whether, for example, let's say you live in a wildfire prone area. We know what's happening and we can talk about what would cause a wildfire. In the case of flooding, our weather service has had the ability to make really excellent predictions. The problem is much more of a low-tech reality. In other words, we're depending on rather inexpensive digital based virtual warning systems, depending on people, older people, people with disabilities, people whose phones have run out of batteries or don't turn them on at night, to use those kinds of systems, or even television or radio warnings, which have zero effect in the middle of the night, of course. This is not good enough. I remember in January this year, with the LA wildfires, that people were stuck and they weren't warned appropriately. We need to have very low-tech, very, very loud, audible alarms and sirens in areas at risk of big disasters like this. The Paradise Fires in California in 2018 or 19, the same thing happened. We repeated that mistake without having audible warnings with the LA fires. And now we have the situation of inadequate warnings in Texas, which has killed a lot of people. There's really no excuse at this point, Chris. And I think we have to take this under serious advisement. We don't need an investigation as much as we need, sirens in communities at risk. And, we have to figure out what were all of the factors that contributed to this tragedy, some of which we could have avoided and some which not. But we have a lot of work to do here.